داستان مهاجرتم از افغانستان. بعد از فروپاشی حکومت دکتر نجیب الله، مجاهدین سر قدرت شدند. بعد از 6 ماه بعد حکومت مجاهدین جنگ داخلی بین گروه های مختلف در گرفتن. ما به طرف مزار شریف مهاجر شدیم. بعد از 3 سال بعد طالبان مزار شریف را گرفت. همه مهاجر شدن. من به طرف ازبکستان رفتم. از ازبکستان آمدم مسکو. از مسکو به طرف لیتوانیا. از لیتوانیا و پولند مدت 3 ماه بندی بودیم. بعد از ما را دیپورت کردن به مسکو. بعد از مدت 3 ماه ما دوباره به طرف بلاروسیا آمدیم. از بلاروسیا به پولند. از پولند به شهر لیپزیگ آلمان. از لیپزیگ آمدیم به آمبورگ. از آمبورگ رفتیم به بلژیک. از بلژیک آمدیم به انگلستان، به دوور. سخت‌ترین خاطرات زندگی ما از راه مهاجرت از مسکو به لیتوانیا. 3 روز ما به جنگل ها پای پیاده با شکم گرسنه. بعد از 2006 1999 تا 2006 ما وقتی که در انگلیس آمدیم در دوور که ما را پلیس گرفت گفت برین هر سو که خودتان میرین. ما بودم همراه یک دوستم آمدیم به طرف لندن. با مشکلات زیادی روبرو بودیم. در راه پول ما خلاص شد. حتی پیسه یک بوتل آب نداشتیم که بشویم. کشنگی تا که یک نفر تلفن افغان پیدا کردیم که همراه ما کمک کرد. بعد از او ما به هر جایی که می رفتیم ما را کسی کمک نمیکرد. آمدیم در ایست لندن رفتیم به کنسول ایست لندن، ما را کمک نکردن. بعد از ما رفتیم به طرف ساوتال در کنسول ساوتال رفتیم. ما را گفت یک آدرس بده که ما برای شما خط روان کنیم. هیچ کسی پیدا نمیشد که ما را آدرس خود بده. کنسول ما را گفت ما چی رقم تو را آدرس بدیم، با ما هیچ کدام کمکی نکرد. بعد از ما آمدم پالیدم، یک کار پیدا کردم روزی 20 پوند که هفته 120 پوند میشد که 60 پوندش هم کرایه خانه میدادم. 40 پوند دیگه هم میخوردیم. 20 روپه برای یک کالا و چیز برای ما میموند. هر جایی که ما میرفتیم با ما کسی کمک نمیکرد. در کنسول رفتیم حساب من اومده بود ما درس بخونم، کسی در ما چیزی کمک نکرد. من مجبور بودم من کار کنم. 2004 بعد از خودم سلف امپلایی شدم که گاراژ گرفتم. تا 2006 در ماه 6 که من فامیلی ما آوردم. بعد از اون یک از زندگی من خوبتر شد و راحت تر شد.
Hi everyone, so today I'm going to talk about my parents' experiences as refugees from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is still a war-torn country to this day, where my parents fled to live a better quality of life in the Western world. At first they went to Russia, which was the USSR at the time and a communist society. My father had a business there where the change from communism to capitalism profoundly impacted his business. But in terms of the changes of ideology, it definitely impacted how people viewed him, and my mother too, as refugees. Now, at first, they weren't so much belittled in a communist society, but when capitalism came to the country, they were belittled in terms of in business. in my father's perspective, and just going out in Russia with my mother's perspective, because everyone will just look at her and give her weird looks, and it just doesn't, obviously it's not right at all to do that, even in current society. And the fact that there are changes that are happening within the societies and the way people are viewing refugees is something to be proud of and something to be positive about. However, there are still downfalls about being a refugee. To this day, people still think that you do not belong in the country, or you should go back to where you came from. Things like that still go on to this day, which is not right. Of course, it's definitely completely not right at all. So, of course, my appreciation has grown a lot from hearing these narratives from my parents. For example, if we were to think about it this way, if they didn't come from Afghanistan, I would still be living there with my siblings and with my parents. And hearing about these killings every day, and hearing about these bombs and witnessing bombs happening in my local area would have been a norm for me if we were to still be living there. But now that when my parents decided to not live there and not give their kids that life, and to come here in the Western world, has made me realize that this comfortability that we're living in is so great, and we should always be appreciative of the comfortability that we are living in, because our definition of comfortability is completely different to the people of Afghanistan or wherever anyone else's parents that came as refugees see it as.
My dad is the first generation of my family to come here into the United Kingdom. He came here seeking refuge from the ongoing problems in my home country, Afghanistan, and he knew that he wanted children one day. So he wanted to provide me, my siblings, with a better life, better opportunities, things he's never really been able to experience because of the limitations in Afghanistan. He always used to tell me and my siblings about the stories of how he got here and the struggles he went through. For him to go through what he did, for me and for my family, it just shows that we can't really take any of this for granted, because he worked so hard to get here. He spent so long, so many sacrifices as well. And you can't just let that all go down the drain. So it puts a lot of pressure on, well, me personally, on becoming successful, because, if I'm not successful, then he did all of this for what? For nothing.
One story that has stuck with me that my father told me was when he was on his journey to Lithuania and he was captured and taken to jail. He told me about how he was treated inside jail. They treated him like as if he was a murderer, and the lack of basic necessities that he was provided with, and that he was initially deported from Lithuania back to Poland, and how he had to start his journey again. When he came here, he told me how it was quite hard to settle in, and in comparison to today, when he came here, he had to figure out everything himself. That meant from finding a job to settling in, learning a new language. Initially, my father came here to study, but because of the lack of support, he couldn't, so therefore it resulted him to having to work. His dream has always been to be a doctor, and taking from this, I really want to make him proud. Because my dad couldn't fulfill his dreams, I want to fulfill mine.
Some stories that I've heard about my parents' experiences when immigrating to this country is how hard the journey was because of how dangerous it was, and how there was numerous amount of people taking a really risky route to here. Another experience is about how rough the conditions were when they would live out in the refugee camps and other areas, because there were numerous people that would share rooms and share supplies, and they were complete strangers.
Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm going to be speaking for Rose's page, Refugee Minds, about my mom's experiences as a refugee and what I believe in now. So when my mom was younger, around 10 years old, she had escaped Vietnam to go to Hong Kong because life there was just distraught. Not good, not great. And so to do this, my grandparents had gone to jail a few times because escaping in the means of the government was illegal and not like they just put them in there. Despite that, my grandparents still had the courage to go with their children onto a boat to Hong Kong. And I think, as many other refugees know, life and death situations come up to this when the sea is involved. But despite that, they still made it to Hong Kong. And living there, they lived in camps and had to live in small spaces and had to sustain food in order to eat healthily and live well, eating rice and sardines and such salvageable food. Despite that, my mum still had some sort of education, some sort of living, although they didn't have any citizenship there. And because of this issue with the citizenship, my family tried to go to Canada and Australia when my other family were already there. But instead they were sent to France because you didn't really have a choice. When my mum went to France, she was around 16, 17, and she had to learn a whole other language again, despite already learning Cantonese and having Vietnamese as her home language. And this caused her education quite a lot. It was quite detrimental. It was really hard for her to even pass the equivalent of the A-level because of the language barrier. So then her friends living in England, she decided to come here instead because life seemed better here for her. And coming here, she ended up going into nails, going into childcare, doing all sorts and living her life and having a better life, which was the key reason why they had left Vietnam in the first place. Achieving that, it changed my perspective quite a lot, that I wanted to do well in education because my mum didn't get the chance to and I was given the chance to. And I want to take my life quite seriously, quite well, but also have fun, because I was given comfort. I was literally given a pillow as soon as I was born, while my mum had to live in the rough. And so this makes me think all the time about my life, that I want to live well and happy, and my mum never will force me to do education if I didn't want to, but I want to make her proud, I want to do well, and I want to push myself forward. Another thing where it changes my perspective is that I believe that you can never really go through something so hard because other people probably have gone through it harder and they're still here now. So basically, to never give up.
Being the child of immigrant parents and a second generation immigrant has made me sympathize a lot with refugees and made me understand the harsh reality of third world problems. However, it has also made me more grateful for my lifestyle and made me grateful for my parents' sacrifices, because without those sacrifices being made, I wouldn't have the life, the education, the freedom that I do today. And it's all thanks to the hardship that my parents had to go through. Stories that I hear from my parents now that I've all grown up and everything has definitely given me a much more of appreciation to life, and sort of makes me compare the different societies that they lived in and the way whether society has progressed or regressed in terms of refugees and just living as a whole.
To get here, and there was one that always kind of stuck with me. It was about the time he spent in Russia. It was during the freezing winter, and he told us he had to walk miles in the freezing cold, blisters, everything, all for an opportunity that was never guaranteed to him. It was never guaranteed that he was going to make it here successfully, but he still went through with it, he still persevered with it, all to give us a better life, a better opportunity.
I started this project because most of my family that settled into Europe are refugees, including my father, and the stories that he's told me has touched me a lot, and I feel like even till today the perspective of refugees are not looked on, and that there's very minimal coverage on it. I want to be a voice for refugees, and also my father, when he first came into this country, there wasn't a support system for him. I want to take that source of inspiration and be a support system for other refugees, and also raise awareness for what they go through. Their journey isn't guaranteed. They sacrifice a lot, and when you see media coverage, you can often see that refugees are portrayed in a negative light and that it's never told from their perspective. Majority of the time you see people talking about how they should go back to their own countries, or there's never any sort of support system where they can seek help. Hearing stories from my family and other refugees, it shows that it takes a lot for them to settle in here, especially having to learn a new language, adapting to a new place. When hearing my father's story, I've realised that there's a lot of things that I've taken for granted, especially education. If I was back in Afghanistan, I would have not had the privilege to study, and that's one thing that motivates me to study and be successful. I hope that one day I could make my family, including my father, proud, and that his sacrifices and having to come to this country was not in vain. I hope that people take this as a source of inspiration and also raise awareness about refugees and the hardship that they go through, especially from having to risk their lives to a journey that they do not know if they will survive, to also coming into a new country and having to adapt, learn a new language and get used to the environment.